And with that thundering clud of the vacuum of sound here in the world's worst produced television show on the internet, I bid you a welcome adieu. I don't generally like to start the show with just regular volume. It's generally my job, as you know by now, to see if I can find some way to either blow out your speakers or generally mess up your mind. It's kind of a psychological thing I do. It kind of keeps you off balance, stops you from asking the tough questions. And as we all know by now, I have a reputation to protect. Everybody, it's Bill Whittle, Stratosphere Lounge, episode number 108. I'm wearing my awesome shirt, one of my all-time favorites. Got into, really had fun. I just posted today the second of the interviews I did with Stefan Molyneux, and we shot one today. I'm just checking the feedback stream because usually this is where I get all of my technical feedback from the 72 or 78 engineers that are watching the show. Now I don't have anybody in the back booth. I got somebody going, hey, your mic's not working. Hello. Appears to be though. Anyway, it's good to see everyone again. Been a couple weeks. So as I was saying, I wore the shirt specifically because I did an interview with Stefan. Again, the third one we did, talked for an hour about Trump and about Islam in America. And I actually think the first two we did together were really kind of cool, but I thought the one we did today was epic. I mean, I thought it was just absolutely epic. Talked about IQ, talked about all kinds. It was fantastic. So we'll put that up in the next day or two. But the reason I wore the shirt is, those of you who will see the Stefan interview, I started it off with a little rant, which I will just very quickly give you a summarized form on. I watched the last thing I did on Stefan's channel, and Stefan, is I still, there's so many of his videos that I haven't seen yet that I'd like to watch, with all my free time. But he's got one in terms of government versus anarchy and libertarianism versus anarchy and stuff. So I don't know exactly where he stands on that, but I do know he's much more on the libertarian side, anarchy side than I am, and a lot of his readers are too. So when I watched the last video he did, that I did the interview with him on, the one on political correctness, I went to his YouTube page and I read the viewer comments. And as usual, most of them are very nice. But as I learned a long time ago, I should never read YouTube comments ever. And I know I've said this a few times on the show, but Jeremy Boring figured it out because I'm a cantankerous person sometimes, and I generally don't like to be slandered without fighting back. I don't mind when people argue with me about the points I'm making, but they never seem to. They always seem to find some personal insult or something. So, Jeremy Boring figured out that the only aspect of my personality that's stronger than my cantankerousness is my vanity. And he said, as far as YouTube comments go and arguing with people on the internet, he said, Zeus doesn't come down from Olympus to argue with shepherds about the weather. And normally that works well for me. But I was looking at some of the feedback on Stefan's channel page from some of his regular viewers, and one or two people, at least one or two different people, kept referring to me as a statist. And apparently I'm a statist because I believe in the military or something. And as I said at the beginning of the interview with Stefan, I said, look, man, I don't mind getting called names. And if you're going to be, Simon Wiesenthal and you're going to hunt Nazis for the rest of your life, you're expecting somebody's going to be calling you a filthy Jew somewhere at the point in your career. But if you're Simon Wiesenthal, you don't particularly want to be called a Nazi. I've spent my entire political career as long as I've been doing this, fighting the big state. And so I basically just did this little rant for the two or three people that were making comments. But I said, I'm wearing this T-shirt today because this is what I want. I want this giant federal state that we have now to go back into the little government-sized box that it came out of. I want it to defend the country with an army, a navy, and an air force or whatever we need, build a few roads, and enforce a very few small number of rules. Don't make the rules, just enforce them, because some people can't play this game without cheating and some people can't play this game without stealing. And that's about it. And then I said, if you're going to call me a statist to my face, then this evening is not going to end well for either of us. And if you persist in doing it, I just wish you'd go to the very top of a very tall building and jump off, and that will give you enough time in free fall for you able to go F yourself. So that's it. There are some things that I put up with and some slanders that I don't. And being called a statist really upset me just more than probably should have. So anyway, that's out of the way. Twice now. I got to make that speech twice today. Hey, we got an incredible show here. I know I always say that. I'm always so impressed with the questions, but for some reason or another, these questions were really substantial tonight. Just before we get going, as I know I missed a couple weeks, we are doing, you know what, I have a high level of confidence that I can actually pull this off. We are doing a brand new website design, and it's going to be striking and bold and really cool. We're going to be bringing in new programming, and we are bringing Firewall back. One way or another, we are bringing Firewall back, and that means we need more stuff than what we need to do this show or Time Over Target, to do the big full body stuff and make it look better, because I will not do a firewall that looks worse. We need some help. We need a membership push. So we do Time Over Targets. We just did number 100. That's the show where we take questions from our membership, but we decided, we need to do another relatively simple show. And one of the reasons I want to bring Firewall back, and one of the reasons why I want to talk to you about this next show real quick, is because just a perfectly great example. I shoot Afterburners on Tuesday, and they're released on Thursday down at PJTV. So last Tuesday I shot Clockboy, a story of modern Islam. Within certainly less than 24 hours of shooting it, well, maybe probably 24 or 25 hours, something like that, of me shooting that Afterburner, the San Bernardino thing happens. And I can't get another Afterburner into the marketplace until November 15th, which is a week from tomorrow, because they shoot it on Tuesday, release it on Thursday. It's 15 days after the news cycle. Now, that was an extreme case because the news happened the day after I do my bi-weekly Afterburners, but it's a pretty good example. So we have had a big growth in membership, not a huge growth, but a significant growth. And we sat down and made a decision. This may be hard for you guys to really fully realize. It took me a while to realize it, certainly. But if you add up all of the views I've had on the internet, it's something like 30, 40 million views across hundreds of videos. Some have done 2-3 million views, but a lot of them have done, in the several hundred thousands, and plus when you count the things on Facebook and all the rest of it. But it wasn't too long ago that I realized that, look, whatever I have out there, 20, 30 million views on YouTube, every single one of those has carried a commercial either for PJTV or for either Declaration Entertainment or Truth Revolt most recently. And none of them have carried a commercial for this little company we have called BillWhittle.com. So we're bringing these things back, and we're going to try and promote them and try and put all of the membership stuff into one little box. So I have here, it played for people who are subscribers. A few thousand people saw it on the YouTube channel, but I thought I'd just run it for you here. This is not the opening credits. It's a little too slow for the opening credits. It's a teaser for a show I'm going to do called The Nexus Report. And the nice thing about The Nexus Report is it's pretty simple, like Time Over Target, but Time Over Target is questions from members. Nexus Report is I'm going to just come in, read, drudge, and get on camera twice a week and talk about what's happening now. It's a news thing. And we'll make it members only, at least one of those members only, and if it's a really killer one, we might open it up to the public. So I did an opening Facebook thing, and I am hoping that this will show up. So this is pretty cool. This is the opening for the Nexus Report, which will be some members-only content at BillWhittle.com, and let's see if we can actually pull this off here. Let's see. Here we go. Ta-da. Never mind. I think that's just badass, frankly. I think it just looks really, really cool, especially that in graphic. I think it looks awesome. So, so at least twice a week, hopefully 3 times a week. One of the other things we're going to do with opening up this membership thing is I'm just going to do 5 minutes on whatever, or 10 or 20 or half an hour, whatever, on one news subject, and obviously the San Bernardino shooting's on a lot of people's mind, and we got a lot of questions about that. So that's coming. The new web design is just spectacular. I mean, I just can't believe how good it looks. We're going to try and get that going just as quickly as possible. We have teams of trained monkeys that'll apparently be working around the clock. We've gone out and bought. They seem to like bananas better, but those have you priced things? They're expensive. We're going to go with the pressed algae tablets. They seem to be filled with enough vitamins, and frankly, we don't care how long they live so long as they get the website up on time. And after that, it's not really my problem, is it, honestly? We got a lot of great questions, so let's get started. A lot of things on the news we haven't spoken for the last 2-3 weeks. Now, this first one is the longest question I've ever had to read on the show, and I've cut it down significantly because it took me a while to understand the question. At first, I thought maybe he was being a little arch and that the whole question was ironic, and then I realized, no, he's making a point, and he's making a really interesting point, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this because I almost never look at these questions before I roll. But this one is interesting, so here it is. It's from Chris Taylor, and he writes, and the answer comes from a song from 1978. Chris Taylor says, Mr. Whittle, why do you insist on trying to ruin our attempt at domesticating the meme of Islam? Of course we know that Islam is a problem. That's why we're trying to destroy their knowledge of who they are. Of course we know that Islam isn't the religion of peace, but how will we get them to believe the lie if it isn't repeated enough? Now, as you yourself pointed out, Americans now think they lost the Vietnam War. They think Hoover was a cross-dresser and the Civil War was fought to end slavery. The Negroes think that the Democrats are the party that has looked out for their best interest, fooling the mostly illiterate Mohammedans. Nice word there from back in the past. I might have said Musclemen as well if you wanted to go back far enough. Fooling the mostly illiterate Mohammedans will be a breeze in comparison. You've got to be a smart guy, Mr. Whittle. I wouldn't take that bet if I were you. There's just evidence on both sides of that particular issue. Are you going to start telling everybody that Santa and the Easter Bunny are lies next, or are you going to catch on that there are some things that we are all supposed to agree to lie about? Why can't you catch on about other things like Islam is the religion of peace? Please give this program a chance, and in a generation or two, those Muslims will be debating whether or not their transgender imam should wear a hijab or a tagaya cap. Every time you selfishly refuse to repeat the proper lie, the future death of millions becomes a little more likely. Sincerely yours, a concerned fellow intellectual. First of all, it's a superb question. Secondly, Chris, I say this with all the kindness of anybody who watches my show. If you call me an intellectual again, I'm going to find a way to meet you. I'm going to stab your eyes out with a pencil. The argument is an interesting argument. I've never heard it before. I've never thought about it before. But unless I grossly misunderstand him, and I cut a little bit, but I think that's the thrust of it. What he's basically saying is that by telling Muslims that Islam is the religion of peace long enough, the middle of the country will believe it, and that by me saying things like, no, they're a bunch of murdering savage barbarians, we're basically waking them up to the fact that that's what they really are. So let's keep telling the kids that Santa Claus is real until they believe it's real, and that's going to be a net improvement. I think the answer to your question, though, Chris, again, I certainly am trying to give you this. It's a complex issue, and I believe I've understood it. I hope I have. If not, I'll get it next week, and we'll try again. But I think the answer to your question comes in a very kind of an offhanded little sentence that you wrote. And that sentence is this: please give this program a chance, and in a generation or two, those Muslims will be debating whether or not their transgendered imam should wear a hijab or a tagaya cap, whatever that is. And that, to me, is the answer to your question. We have given them several generations. We've given Muslims in the West several generations. We've given them at least one. From the moment of September 12th, 2001, we've been told that Islam is a religion of peace. We were told this by George Bush. We were told that Islam is a religion of peace. We were told that the Islamic jihadis who did all the murdering had hijacked the religion of peace, that it's not the real religion of peace. And we have basically been telling this lie, which you admit is a lie, and I certainly think is a lie. We're on the same page here. We've been telling this lie in this country actively and loudly since 14 years now, and we've been telling it in the West for at least a generation or two before that, certainly in France and Scandinavia, where they've been importing Muslim workers from the 70s. We've been telling the lie for 40 years, 45 years. We've been telling the lie for 2 generations. So the question the answer to your question is embedded in the question itself. And that question is, since we have been telling Islam the lie that it is a religion of peace, have Muslims become more moderate or have they become more radical? And the answer is, without question, they have become more radical. Anybody will tell you that. I don't think that's up for discussion. We've told them that they're welcome. We've told them that both American society and European society welcomes them as equals. I did an interview with a guy from Sweden today at PJTV where he basically said that the Sweden's stated goal, the stated goal of the government, which was backed by most of the people, was that we were going to, he said that it was equal responsibility between the native Swedes and the immigrants. They were equally responsible to come together and form this new Sweden that didn't look like old Sweden and it didn't look like old Algeria or whatever, but it was going to be this new thing. And I said, well, what does this thing look like? He said, nobody knows. We just were told we have an equal responsibility to do it. Now, how's that work out for Sweden? In Sweden and Europe and France and here in this country, we've been telling Muslims that it's the religion of peace, that we can coexist, that it's all about coexistence. The entire theory of America is groups of differing people coexisting. A guy's got a pizza shop on one corner of New York City, and he's from India, and across the way is a Pakistani who's running a Chinese food store, and they're not allowed to kill each other, over these long-lost feuds and so on and so on and so on. So we have been telling this lie for 2 generations now, and the question is, how's it been working out for us so far? I don't think it's worked out very well. I think they've gotten far more radicalized. I don't really think that's up for discussion. Certainly, if you look at these French banlieues, these second and third generation Muslims are far more radicalized than the hardworking first generation Muslims who came here and wanted to assimilate. So I think your theory is wrong. In fact, I know your theory is wrong, and I think what is an alternate theory that explains the actual data better, because they are getting far more radicalized, and we have bent over backwards in the West and in America in particular. There's not a whole lot of countries that would have endured. When we talk about the terrorist attacks in Paris and how horrible they are, it's 127 people, right? There's an attack in a nightclub in Bali where a lot of Australians were, 40 people. It's not even that the numbers don't scale, because 128 people is not 3,000 people. If they'd gunned down 3,000 people, or whatever their percentage of our population is, 500 people, whatever the number is, that would be one thing. But that's not just what happened on 9/11. If you are going to affect the French psyche the same way that the American psyche was affected, I think you have to have a terrorist attack in Paris that kills 500 or 600 people and destroys the Eiffel Tower before their eyes. That's what I think is an equivalent level of psychic shock. They have to watch the Eiffel Tower collapse in front of their eyes and kill 600 people, which is proportionally what they would lose compared to our population. And then you would be able to approximate the kind of shock that we got on 9/11. And so how did we react after 9/11? Well, I think one man who was a Sikh was killed, which is a shame because Sikhs have nothing to do with the Muslim religion, but he was wearing a turban. I think one American out of 300 million of us lost his mind, committed a murder against a guy who had nothing to do with it. But since then, we've been telling the lie that Islam is moderate. And as I said in that Afterburner of Failure of Intelligence, the longer I think about it, the more I realize, no. What's happened is there is the Muslim middle, the moderates, and we need to win these people. I'm not saying we need to win them in order to survive as a country. I'm saying we need to win them in order to survive as a country that doesn't have a great deal of blood on its hands. But we need to sway them. And I don't think that agreeing with these terrorists and pretending it's not happening I don't think it's not only not helping us, I think it's causing the problem. I think the middle is the middle. And I don't think it's just Muslims. I think the middle of every population is the middle. And you could go, as I did in that Afterburner, and say, take the middle of Germany. 7% of the German population was Nazi. The middle was radicalized by the Nazis, who were fanatics, ideological fanatics, and they radicalized the middle. Hitler never got more than 47% of the vote until he was appointed chancellor, and once he'd been in office for less than a year, they had a plebiscite. He got 98%, 99% after more than a year. After he goes into the Rhineland and after he annexes Austria, he's getting 98% of the vote. The middle, which had never given the Nazis more than 40 and usually consigned them to 21% of the population were voting Nazis, were radicalized by the extremists. And the reason they got that degree of support was there was no counter-narrative to the Nazis. The Nazis understood there was one counter-narrative to National Socialism. The Nazi leaders are very clear about this. You can look at all of them, and they said the threat to Nazism in Germany is not the Weimar Republic. Everybody hates the Weimar Republic. And what Hitler said and what Goebbels said, but what Hitler understood, the one critical insight that Hitler had into the human condition was that the bourgeoisie of the Weimar Republic, in other words, the middle-class people in the Weimar Republic, were not going to fight or die over anything. They wanted their businesses, they wanted their beer, they wanted their families, and they wanted to sit around and sing songs, and they didn't want to lose the little they had after World War I. He knew, and nothing but contempt for these bourgeois parties. But the Nazis did know that there was one genuine threat to them assuming power, and that threat to Nazis in the 20s and 30s was the communists, because the communists had a compelling story, and like the Nazis who had a compelling story, the communists were prepared to get in the streets and fight and die over it with bricks, bats, bare hands, weapons, knives. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people were killed in brawls in the time between, let's say, the assumption of the Nazi Party right around 1921 to the assumption of power, legitimate power in 1933. They knew that the communists had a story that could compete with them, and so they decided the communists had to be shut down. And that's what the SA was for, was just to shut down communist meetings. So I maintain that, contrary to your theory, the answer is to, in fact, tell the moderates, no, we're on to you murdering savages, and we're going to kill every single last one of you. We're going to kill the last one of you. We're going to take you down, hunt you down to the last man. Oh, look, some of the monkeys are escaping. They're walking out into the hallway. They just get back to work there. Get back to your computers. God almighty, I got to go. Oh, see? So no, in all seriousness, Chris, I'm assuming your point was serious. It may have been an extremely dry irony, but it was an interesting point. But I don't buy it. I think the only way to keep the moderates moderate is by telling them, here's a better story, and that story is living under American laws, under the Constitution, getting along with everybody else, and if you decide you want to try this Sharia thing, or if you decide you want to go join ISIS, then we are going to gun you down in a hail of gunfire, and we're going to do it all the time. And I think it would be very, very useful for American Muslims to know what they don't know in Europe, and what they are constantly reinforced on not being part of in Europe, and that is, in Europe, when Muslims decide to run rampage and set entire country on fire, they're met by a very ineffectual police. If they try it here, they'll also be met by a very ineffectual police, because we see how the police has to respond in situations like Ferguson and so on. But if they decide they really want to drop the other shoe and send the balloons up, they're going to run into 70 million armed Americans. And I actually do not think that these ISIS sympathizers are really quite completely aware of what that means. In fact, I know for a certain moral fact they have no idea what they think. They know what they think we are. They think we're a bunch of sniveling cowards. I don't blame them for them thinking that. Our president's a sniveling coward, and every message he sends is about cowardice and retreat. But the American people, 1 in 4, probably 1 in 5, are armed to the teeth, and we're ready. We're ready for these guys. So I think it's an interesting theory, but I don't think the evidence supports it. I think, in fact, the evidence supports just the opposite. I think we've been coddling them way too long and giving the moderates a chance to listen to these extremists with with a counter narrative that makes it look like we're not even on the same planet. When they murder 106, however many it was, 130 Frenchmen, and they're lying in pools of blood, and the West is, or the President of the United States says, we are not at war with Islam, and the greatest threat to our future is climate change. What do you think that tells Muslims? It tells them he's an idiot. It tells them he has no idea what's going on. It tells them he doesn't understand Islam, and it tells them that we are so weak. If we've got a guy that stupid as our leader, we are the weak ones in the West, and the radicals are going to win. And people want to go with the side that's going to win. That's how it works. Osama bin Laden said, given a choice between a weak horse and a strong horse, people will pick the strong horse, and he's right. But we're not giving them a choice between a weak horse and a strong horse. We're giving the moderates certainly the moderates in Europe, a choice between a strong horse and no horse. And we got to not only get out there with a horse, we got to get out there with a better horse than the ones they have, so the moderates have something to be pushed towards. Thank you for an interesting and provocative question. It took me a while to get the hang of that. These two questions are related, and I often find questions that are related. So if I ask one and credit it to somebody and you wrote pretty much the same thing, I try to get them both, and if I don't, I certainly apologize. But Cindy Lucin says the politically correct crowd's heads are exploding listening to Mr. Trump every day. In your opinion, is the Donald doing damage to the Republican image, as some are saying, or is he helping inoculate us from the PC virus that has infected our Western culture? And similarly, Ray Malzwicki asks, on his podcast show, Klavan kicked Trump to the curb and called him despicable. Do you maintain that he's a better despicable than Hillary Rodham Clinton, and does he still get your potential vote? Yeah, if I'm going to have a lunatic Marxist, a lunatic narcissist making all these confusing statements, I'd much rather have them be a capitalist than a communist corrupt felon. So yes, he gets my vote over Hillary Rodham Clinton. Yes, completely. And when Donald Trump says things like we need to use the internet to shut down free speech, this should give you some very, very serious doubts about this guy, and I have serious doubts about this guy. But there's a bigger issue here. And of course, it took the likes of an actual genius, a serious genius, to point it out to me. And I'm just going to repeat what he said here, and that genius is Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh said, listen, he basically said that Trump is playing the media like a Stradivarius, and he is. And I think Rush's point, certainly would be my point, would be if Donald Trump can destroy the credibility of the media and simply laughing at and ignoring the PC howls of protest and just bullying on, then that's even worth losing an election over. Rush didn't say that, but I'm saying it. The reason that we vote the way we do is because the media controls the information base. All this political correctness is shoved down our throats. As I pointed out earlier today with Stefan, in 2004, Evan Thomas, who was an editor at Newsweek magazine, said in a slip of the tongue, basically, for somebody who was paying attention, maybe not on his team, he said what everybody knew to be true, that in 2004, Evan Thomas, who was the editor at Newsweek, said, I think media bias is going to be worth 15 points at the polls. 15. So I then went and said, well, if the media bias towards helping John Kerry who's not exactly the golden candidate, if John Kerry was going to get a 15-point tailwind in 2004, then Barack Obama's tailwind must be 30 points, 40 points at least, given how far they bend over backwards for him and just completely suppress news that's detrimental to him. But let's just say that Evan Thomas was right, and let's say that Barack Obama got the same 15 points that he estimated John Kerry was going to get in 2004. If you take the 2008 electoral map and you remove 15 points from Barack Obama's totals in every state and add 15 percentage points to John McCain's total in every state, you find that in 2008, Obama wins the District of Columbia, he wins Delaware, and that's all he wins. It's President McCain with 503 electoral votes. 503 is what he gets if press bias, as estimated by the press, were eliminated. In other words, if we all got accurate news, not conservative news, just accurate news, we would vote like Kansas. The country would never elect a Democrat again, ever, ever. So that's the real threat to the Republic, is the fact that the news media, newspapers, the press, was once the greatest defender of this republic because they were the immune system that identified, located, and destroyed corruption of either party wherever it was found. And if it was a liberal paper attacking conservative politicians or a Republican paper attacking Democratic politicians, it didn't matter. The work got done. Daylight was shined on these animals, and the public got information, and they voted accordingly. But for 20, 30 years now, because of the leftist infiltration of all of our universities, but specifically journalism schools, the press is now the audiovisual department of the Democratic Party. And if Donald Trump is able to destroy that, the value of being able to destroy that is almost incalculable for our side. And that's why the press is so completely terrified of Donald Trump. Now, there's another aspect to this that I think is really, really interesting. I'm pretty sure Rush made the identification of the press as the priesthood, but I was talking with Stefan today in that interview, which we'll post the next day or two, and he said something very simple and really interesting. He said, you cannot have a monarchy without a priesthood. And I think that's true throughout history. In other words, if you're going to enslave people, if you are going to coerce people to do your will over time, you need two different elements. You need the element on the ground, which is the applied violence of the state. So let's say it's Henry II, who's a baron, and he's a vicious, violent murderer, and he's ready to go out there and lop off some heads and provide the physical force necessary to win on the streets. You need that, and that can make you king, but it can't keep you king. Because if people are starving in their little mud huts because they bring you all of the potatoes and all of the chickens that they're able to raise on their own, because it's their duty and you're the king, then in order to survive as a monarchy or any other system, it doesn't have to be a monarchy, it can be an emir, it can be a pasha, it can be an emperor, it can be whatever. In order for that to survive, you have to have a secondary input which affects stability, and that is the religious class. So what happens in the Middle Ages in medieval times is, you have a person who becomes king, and he's ruling by violence. But he really is just one guy, and he's got some guards, and he's got some feudal lords underneath him. He's got a few dukes and barons who are on his side, but they all want to be king too, so that can go either way. What really keeps the king in power is the priesthood, because the priesthood says to the common person, number one, it's God's will that he is the king, and it's God's will that you're a serf or a peasant who goes out and works for the king. That's God's will. And furthermore, if you do this and go along with God's will, then in paradise, when you die, you'll live just like a king too. And if he's an evil king, he'll get his reward and he'll go to hell. And if you're a virtuous person, you'll live in paradise like the king does. All you have to do is wait till you die, and then it's just going to happen. And so the priesthood protects the monarchy, and then, needless to say, the monarchy protects the priesthood. Then King Henry gives enormous, huge tracts of land to the church. And he gives them lots and lots of money, and they get gold-plated everything. And the church and the political leadership, the religious leadership and the political leadership, get into orbit around each other. And they constantly reinforce each other. Now, in modern politics, when the press was an unbiased, even if it wasn't unbiased, when there were mutual bias at work, when the press was functioning as the immune system to seek out corruption in this country, then you had a reasonably honest republic. Because if you a Republican president and you do something heinous, maybe your Republican newspaper won't cover you, but the Democratic one will, and vice versa. But if it's all Democrats and all progressives, then what you have is you have a priesthood. And the priesthood is not just protecting and anointing Democrats, although it's mostly doing that. Rush was making the point that it protects and anoints anybody inside the Beltway. That it is a operational mode that sitting people like the Speaker of the House, Paul, whose name was, man, I'm losing, man, I'm just getting old. That basically the press also protects the Republicans inside the Beltway as long as they agree with the press. See, that's it. If Rush said the press decides who's destroyed, the press decides who succeeds. The press decides, and they'll throw Republicans a few bone, and Boehner can stay, and they're not going to look too deeply into Boehner, and not going to look too deeply into McConnell, because it's in the interest of the progressives to have a Boehner and a McConnell. It's what you want. If I'm a Gator fan, I want the Seminoles to have the worst coach in the nation, and I want to keep him there. Last thing I want to do is go, this coach is awful, we got to get rid of him. I want him to be a terrible coach. And so Rush says that the priesthood of the press protects and anoints those inside the Beltway and attacks anybody who might upset this equation. And Rush said that, Rush said that that what Trump is doing is he is simply walking past the priesthood. He's simply walking past them. He simply refuses to give them any power over him. And because he's not willing to bend a knee to the press's opinion, he, in one stroke, has eliminated the power of the press. I talked with this about Stefan today, too. And Stefan said, well, and we get to communicate with each other through the internet so that, the candidates, that Trump can go around the press. But Trump is much smarter than that. Ted Cruz can go around the press, and Rand Paul can go around the press, and we can talk to them on the internet about them, but Trump is much smarter than that. Trump understands that the media so well that he understands that the media's goal is to make him ashamed of what he said and therefore have power over what he says. He's not willing to do that. But the genius of Trump and the press is Trump understands what the press's food source is. And you can't run away from your food source. Every single member of the liberal press despises Donald Trump. And frankly, there's a lot that he says that's worthy of being despised. But what Trump understands is that the press despises him, but the Trump understands what the press's food source is, and the food source for the press is attention. The press needs readers, and they need viewers. The press survives as an organism, as a corporate organism, but as an organism, they need viewership and readership, and Donald Trump is a huge food source to them. So the press can't just walk away from Donald Trump. Every single one of them may hate him to their bones, to the marrow of their bones. But if Donald Trump comes out of a bathroom on a rest stop on Interstate 80 someplace, there's going to be 60 vans and helicopters there to record every single moment of it. You see? He has them by the neck. He's got them by the neck. And he is playing them. And to the degree that Donald Trump is forget attacking the press, because we've seen a few people who attacked the press. Last cycle, Newt Gingrich attacked the press and criticized the press. And Ted Cruz stood up and called the press out and attacked the press, which is the beginning of the fight. But the end of the fight is when you mock the press. And that's advanced work. And I think, frankly, it's kind of like this idea of swordlessness that Sun Tzu talked about. So criticizing the press for being biased is like a level 1 fight. Laughing at the press, which they cannot bear, is a level 2 fight because it's showing that the press is irrelevant. It's showing that the press isn't powerful. I can laugh at you because you've got no power over me. It's like that Bain line, Well, we're the press, and we think it's contemptible what you've just said, Donald Trump. And Donald Trump says, and this gives you power over me? No, it doesn't give him any power over me at all. He doesn't care. The third level of fighting against the press is this idea of swordlessness, where you're no longer criticizing them and you're no longer mocking them. And that state of Satori is ignoring them, is just pretending they're not there. Despicable, disgraceful, unbelievable, racist, blah, 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 blah. You can criticize they're biased, or you can laugh at them. I think Donald Trump's finest moment in the campaign so far was when somebody said, Mr. Trump, what do you have to say about the protesters outside? And he says, what are you talking about? He says, the protesters outside protesting your appearance here. He said, there's 7,000 people in this auditorium. There's 6 people outside. You want to lead with that? What organization are you from anyway, ma'am? She goes, I'm with CNN. And he goes, CNN. Boom. Boom. It's over. It's over for them. What do you mean, CNN? He's doing to CNN what the progressives do to Fox. Where'd you hear the story? Fox. When he says CNN, what he's done is he's basically said to the American people, it's okay. He's giving them permission to say, CNN is a biased organization that is run by far leftists. It is not the impartial, authoritative statement of fact that they've been telling you that it is. It simply is CNN. Marvel Comics. It's the Santa Monica shopper and coupon guide. CNN. He is the boy in the parade that is saying that the emperor doesn't have any clothes, and he's making everybody realize. I have to come back to this analogy, which I've used hundreds of times, because there was a part of it that I don't think I completely understood, and I certainly wasn't explaining hard enough. Here's the real message of the emperor's new clothes. Everybody knows the story. There's an emperor who's rather vain and very vain and rather stupid. And these two con artists come in as tailors, and they say, we would like to present the most elaborate and most magical fabrics that we've ever created to His Majesty. So they let him in, they open up a trunk, and they hold it up, and the two of them together are saying, Your Majesty, look at this shine. The thing that's most remarkable about this cloth, Your Majesty, is that the true beauty of it can only be appreciated by those people who are the smartest and have the greatest sense of taste. And of course, the guy doesn't see anything, but already the fact that one guy says, "Isn't it beautiful?" and the other goes, "Yes, look at this, with a remarkable thing." So then Your Majesty is going to say, "Well, I must be an idiot because I can't see it. So what does the Emperor do?" Is, oh, that's really quite nice. Bring that over. Let me have a closer look at it. Feel the texture, Your Majesty. Feel how smooth the satin is. Look at the way the blue and the gold come out. Oh, it's marvelous. I've never seen anything like it. So he gets out on the parade and he starts going down the parade, and this rumor has spread to everybody in the city that the only people that cannot see this fabric are people who are either too stupid, too disloyal, or too unsophisticated, too vulgar. Here's the point of the story I never, ever, ever seem to emphasize strongly enough. When you hear the story of the Emperor's new clothes, you assume, on some level, in a quick telling of the story, that the people in the parade route see the clothes, and that only the boy at the end doesn't see the clothes, and then when he says he's not wearing any clothes, they suddenly don't see them. But that's not how it works. The grain, the fulcrum of the story of the Emperor's new clothes is, put yourself in the position of one person along that parade route. You don't know. This is the power of it. You see the parade coming along, and you see that the Emperor is naked. He's not wearing any clothing. You don't think necessarily that there's something wrong with you, but everybody around you is going, oh my goodness gracious, oh, it's so beautiful, it's so wonderful. So what do? You already know that if you stand up and say, "Hey, I can't see anything," you assume by everybody else going, oh, the colors. You think either I'm completely insane. That's what you think. You think I'm completely insane. I'm the only person here who can't see this. There must be something wrong with me. And so now this is where the con works or doesn't work. You can't see it. You know you can't see it. You're embarrassed, terrified, and ashamed that you can't see it. But since everybody else sees it, what is your action? What do? You stand there and go, "Spectacular! Spectacular! It's even more beautiful in the sunlight than it was when it was in the shade." And your response to cover the fact that you're not in on this game, your pretend response, is what feeds everybody else on the parade route. Everybody else on the parade route hears people like you going, "Oh, it's wonderful." This is social proof in a nutshell. It's the power of peer pressure and social proof, is the fact that, look, I don't believe this, but I can't be seen to be the only person in this house, in this entire empire, who's so stupid and so vulgar that I can't see it. I can't be that guy. I've got to pretend to see it because I don't want people to know how stupid and vulgar I am. And so what you do is you say, "Oh, yes, yeah," and your actions, by going along with the lie, cues other people for their social proof. And the reason it's a little boy who speaks up at the end of the parade and says he's not wearing any clothes, the reason it's a little boy is because the little boy doesn't know about social proof yet. He doesn't know about peer pressure. He doesn't know about the neighbors getting together. He doesn't know about gossiping. He doesn't know about how nasty people can be. He doesn't know about all the stories they talk about. This guy's quite an idiot, and yes, I pretend to be nice to her, but she's really just a nasty bitch, and so on. Doesn't know any of this stuff. He just looks, he's not wearing any clothes. And the second that kid says that, he doesn't have to go down the rows and convince everybody the argument. What the boy does by saying he's not wearing any clothes is the boy gives everybody in the kingdom the permission. He gives them the permission to say, "I don't see it either." If that little boy can't see it, I'm not alone. I'm not the only crazy person here. I'm not the only person too stupid or vulgar to see these spectacular clothes. If that boy can't see it, I can't see it either. He grants them permission to get away from the groupthink of this social pressure, of this social proof and peer pressure, and the entire illusion comes down like that. So, to the degree that Donald Trump can go, "CNN, I don't think any of us can put a value on how powerful that is. Because as I said earlier, 15 points at the polls for Barack Obama, it's 30 without a heartbeat. It's 20 or 30 for Hillary Clinton. They will lose every single state without the news media. I did the math. He won Delaware and D.C. in 2008 with 15 points of press bias. It's President McCain with 503 electoral votes, and McCain ran the worst campaign I've ever seen. So this is what social proof does. And to the degree that Donald Trump is destroying the credibility of the press by simply saying, you people are all naked. I know you've told everybody that you're the sole arbiters of truth. I know you've told everybody that we just report the facts as they are on the ground and we are completely impartial. I know that's what you're selling, and I know that's the con you're running, but it just ain't so. You guys are naked. You're not wearing any clothes. You're not only as biased as anybody else, you are the princes of bias. Your entire operation is based on bias. Then the game's over. When you can just go, CNN. He didn't just go, Des Moines Daily Register. He went, CNN. The power of that is absolutely magnificent. And Donald Trump deserves a great deal of credit for that. And then I start thinking, you know what, this could be okay, it could be really exciting. And then he starts saying things like, we need to shut down the internet so these ISIS groups can't communicate with each other. Well, what about free speech? And then he says, it's free speech. And it's like, Donald, you've got actual greatness in you. You've got actual greatness. You say things and you have the one indispensable virtue, which is courage. You have the courage to be unpopular. You have the courage to be despised. That courage is the great single virtue in politics. But then your judgment is so poor and your ability to discriminate between issues is so poor that you completely destroy all of the enormous amount of credit and support that you deserve to get through being so honest and courageous. You destroy it by saying things like, oh, free speech. I just don't know what to do. I don't know. So I'll just answer the question in the way it was asked. If it comes down to Clinton or Trump, I'm going with Trump all the way. But I have very, very, very serious and numerous reservations about this guy as an individual. Anyway, I think that's a great question. And hopefully it was a decent answer. So moving on, Cheryl Twomey says, woot back. Cheryl, good to see you. Bill, today is my first anniversary as a Stratolauncher. Let's hear it for Cheryl, ladies and gentlemen. Look at that. Oh, you can't see it, Cheryl, but the applause meter over here is just going nuts. Well, it'll go nuts in 7 seconds when the message gets out to you guys, because I'm 15 seconds ahead of the time. But happy first anniversary and happy birthday to Cheryl for being a Stratolauncher and produces a lot of questions, and she's been great on the Facebook page. So congratulations. I thank you so much for everything I've learned from you in the past 12 months. It's been a wild ride. Thank you very much for all the things I learned from you fine people. Here's my question. Are we living in bizarro world? We as a nation are making excuses for the very ideology that wants to strike ours from the face of the earth. Their atrocities are overlooked in favor of social acceptance. Why are we shaking hands with the devil? Well, we're shaking hands with the devil, I think, and I'm not going to re-answer two questions that I just spent 47 minutes answering. But we're shaking hands with the devil, Cheryl. Here come all the yahoos, and congratulations, Cheryl, up there. You'd be pleased to know. We're shaking hands with the devil for the two reasons that we talked about earlier. We're shaking hands with the devil because we assumed that by calling them a religion of peace and by saying we're not at war with Islam, we're not at war with the middle, we're just at war with terrorists, that would keep the middle from being radicalized. That's one reason we're shaking hands with the devil. I think that has been of limited success. And the other reason we're shaking hands with the devil is because of the social proof, because of the power of what I just described, the power that they have over you for not wanting to admit that you're the last person on earth who can't see the clothes, or you're the last person on earth who believes in the Second Amendment, or you're the last person on earth who thought that Ronald Reagan was a great president. They tell you all the time that the values you hold are the values of dinosaurs. We're progressive. We've progressed beyond where you were. We're further along than you were. We used to think like you, but then we got smarter. And this is why we do it. This is why we agree to things that are completely inverted. This is why our children are such little demons now. In the space of a year, I've gone from thinking of the snowflake generation as being incredibly, unbelievably weak to refining my position about them. They are spectacularly weak and fragile, But more and more every day, I realized that they had a word for it, and the word is spoiled. You would spoil your child. That's the perfect world. They're not only spectacularly fragile and weak, they're becoming almost unimaginably vicious and mean because they've never been confronted. They've never had a bad moment, never had a bad thought. And when a teacher or somebody like Ben Shapiro or whatever goes to tell them that there are other viewpoints than yours, then they want you to go away. And more often than not, these little monsters want you to go away violently because you've given them a little amygdala stimulation, and they don't like the sound of it. They don't like being disagreed with. They don't like being disagreed with because they have no self-respect. They've had self-respect crammed into them from birth, but they've never generated their own, so they don't know what it is. So they react violently. Just a half hour before we started recording this, I saw the link to the article on Ben Shapiro, who went down there to San Diego, I think it was, and basically said, listen, there's another way of looking at these things. Well, income inequality and so on and so on. And somebody said, well, what about poor people? And Ben basically said, look, poor people are poor if you're poor over the course of your life, it's not because you were born into some disadvantaged class. He said it's because you suck with money, which is true. And of course, then the teacher says, now, I think you may have crossed a line here. There are people here from low-income families. And a couple kids start hyperventilating. And then the teacher says, I'm going to clear the class. If you don't want to stay any longer, you may leave now. And large numbers of the students get up to leave. And as they reported in the article, most of them wanted to leave because you don't have to sit through the damn class anymore, right? But some stayed. But then basically the teacher said, my primary job is to protect my students. Protect them. Not from a man with a gun, but protect them with a guy with a different idea of how the world works. Have to protect my students from this idea. And the idea wasn't line everybody up against the wall and shoot them. The idea was, no, if you've been poor all your life, you do not understand how to handle money because you can, in fact, lift yourself out of poverty through hard work, and you don't have to be super smart to do it. But there are some things you have to do, and these things are pretty simple. You get married and you have kids after you're married, and you get a high school degree. No one in this country statistically, you can find a few individuals, but statistically, if you are married to somebody, you marry and you have the kids after the marriage, and both of you have high school degrees, then you will not be poor in America. You will not be poor. You might be lower middle class, but you will find a way to get along. And Ben Shapiro just went down there and said that, and the kid started hyperventilating, and the teacher basically threw himself between his classroom and the incoming bullets of differing opinions, and he thinks that he's protecting his students, but what he's really doing is he's committing child abuse. He's abusing his students by simply saying that by somebody who has a different opinion and maybe something maybe you didn't agree with, or maybe something that hurt your feelings, we're going to stop this right now. That's child abuse. All of it's child abuse. All of this snowflake generation is child abuse. You wouldn't say to a child, although we may be getting close to this point, if you had a middle school kid who's 15, right, or whatever, let's just say they're 15, and this teacher says, no, that's it, that's enough discomfort for this child. I'm going to interpose now and say that this child doesn't have to listen to you anymore. I'm protecting my students. And to me, that's pretty much precisely the same as saying, I've got all these kids here and none of them know how to walk. They're not genetically crippled. It's just that they've been, every time they started crying as a baby, we picked them up and moved them and put them in another chair. And when it's time for them to go to a new class, well, we pick them up and we take them to the new class just out of loving concern. And if you had this entire classroom full of kids whose legs were atrophied as badly as their emotions and their minds are atrophied, and their souls too for that matter, you wouldn't call that protecting your children. You'd call it child abuse. If you took a kid from age of birth and made sure that they never had to walk from point A to point B, that you carried them everywhere out of a deep love for them, if you simply carried them everywhere to the point where they can't stand on their own two legs, let alone walk, and you really did this in a basement someplace, and you said, no, is your child crippled? No, my child's fine. He's just never walked because I never wanted him to go through the pain of falling down. And you've got a kid with these little twigs where his legs should be, you wouldn't be praised for that. You wouldn't be mom of the year for that. You would be put in jail for child abuse if you would not let your child walk from one place to another. And that's what these teachers do. It's not protecting the children. It's destroying them. And, there you go. So look, the world is upside down because the progressives need a world that's upside down for their ideas to be introduced. It's not going to make them work, but in order for people to accept them without rioting in the streets, in order for people to accept this progressive socialist world of equality of result rather than equality of opportunity, the world has to be upside down. It has to be upside down. That's why so many people, in science, most scientists are very, very liberal. And most actors are very, very liberal. And the reason I think that actors and scientists both can be very, very liberal and progressive is because there's no cost for failure in acting or raw science. Matter of fact, in science, if you construct a hypothesis and it proves not to work, you've learned something. You've actually achieved something. This does not explain what we're observing, so now we have to try something new. If you can lock out a theory, that's an achievement for science. If there's a robust theory that presumably explains a lot of things, and you can come up with experiments that show it's not true, you've achieved something in science. You've basically failed up. And in show business, the more vile you are, the more contemptible you are as a person, the more press you get. The more press you get, the more people come to see your movies. You fail upwards in science when you don't prove a theory, and you fail upwards in the entertainment business when you increase your dollar value by reprehensible behavior that makes people fascinated you. However, in aviation and engineering, when you fail, people die. And there's no way to sugarcoat it. You fail badly enough in engineering, or you fail badly enough in aviation, and you or other people or both are going to die. The consequences for failure in aviation and engineering are severe. And so your ability to read what reality actually is rather than what you think it would be is selected among pilots and engineers. And you may think that a bridge would look more beautiful if it were thinner, and you may think that the bridge would be more aesthetic and people may want to run, and your reputation as an architect may be enormously enhanced by reducing the structure on that bridge to something absolutely slender. But if you reduce it to the point where it's no longer structurally sound and it goes down in a breeze and people are killed, you don't have a good career as an engineer ahead of you. Likewise, if you are, if you're the kind of person who simply can't take direction and you get an air traffic control instruction, or you're told to pre-flight your airplane, and you think, I'm Kim Kardashian, or I'm Kanye West. What do I need to pre-flight my airplane for? I'm Kanye West. I'm Jesus. Everybody worships me. Then off you go, and then down you go, and that's what killed John Kennedy, by the way. John Kennedy is not the only person who's ever made this distinction, but John Kennedy flew into conditions that he knew were marginal. He thought, well, I've got a part of an instrument rating, so we'll go and we'll look. I have to be there. I absolutely have to be there. We're late, so I'm going to miss the wedding if we don't go. So John Kennedy takes off into marginal conditions, which rapidly deteriorate into instrument conditions, and John Kennedy doesn't have an instrument rating. So why did John Kennedy take off into instrument conditions when he didn't have an instrument rating? He's John Kennedy. He's John. John gets everything he wants. John is the prince of the nation. John gets every girl he's ever looked at. John has millions and millions of dollars. John wants to start a magazine. People love the magazine. John wants to wear clothes. Everybody wants to give him the clothes for free. How's a guy like that going to say no? So in science, you can fail and be rewarded. In entertainment, you can fail and be rewarded. In engineering, you can fail, lose your job, go to jail, or maybe be killed. And in aviation, if you fail strongly enough, you're going to die, and your innocent passengers are going to die too. So that's why the world's upside down, Cheryl. World's upside down because it's run by actors and idiots. It's run by politicians who have no price to pay for failure. If this world were run by pilots and engineers and policemen, let's say, soldiers are a great example. Why do you think that great numbers of the military are actually pretty liberal? Large numbers of the military voted for Barack Obama, but when you get down to the special forces guys and you get down to the combat infantrymen and the fighter pilots, they're conservative to a person. Why? Because, certainly no disrespect by this. If you're in the rear, if you're loading bombs, or if you're a cook, or again, I do not mean to disrespect these occupations. Can't have a military without them. But in those positions, if you're wrong about reality, it's not going to kill you. When your ability to assess threat and risk and reward is a life or death selection that you're subjected to many, many, many times, then all of a sudden you no longer have the option of ignoring reality. And once you have to be beholden to reality or die, suddenly you start voting more conservative. Funny how that works, isn't it? Brent Cates has a question. He says, Bill, I feel a profound sense of dread about our nation, you and me too, brother. Borders open every day since 9/11. President Godling slingshotting thousands of hostile poor people from backwards cultures who are either security risks as refugees or security risks as immigrants. Our leaders seem to be an ADD kid crying wolf about racism and climate change as the wargs gather to gnaw our bones, the words of the giant wolf creatures that they wrote in Lord of the Rings. Thoughts? Yeah, I do have thoughts. You're right, Brent. I have a sense of dread too. And the sense of dread goes to what Cheryl was talking about. I've never been afraid of Islam. I've never been afraid of it. I've never been afraid of Islam as a force because I know that if we got serious, we could defeat the warriors of Islam in a very short period of time. And it wouldn't be anything as bloody as World War II. But look, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of armed jihadis in this country now. And if this thing were ever to go all the way to full-on war, in other words, if we were to ever realize that they are in fact at war with us and we decided to go to war with them, these guys could go into malls and shoot up a lot of malls, and they could do a lot of damage before they were taken down by the police, the National Guard, and regular citizens. Thousands of jihadis with AK-47s running rampant in this country, trying to do as much damage as they could kill a lot of people. But if you look at the number of people that they could kill as a percentage of the population, it's nothing close to World War II. It's nothing approaches the Civil War. It's nothing like that. So I don't worry about them. I worry about these kids, I worry about a generation that cannot listen to Ben Shapiro talk for 10 minutes about income inequality, and that we're supposed to have these kids defend themselves against these jihadi kids who at age 6 are cutting human heads off and know how to field strip an AK-47. This is what we're going to put up against these guys? No, that's not going to happen. Somebody's going to wake up pretty soon, or something big is going to change. But you know what, Brent? It's like Cheryl said the world's upside down. I've often said, look, in an upside down world, if the world is upside down long enough, big pieces are going to break loose and they're going to move around. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing big pieces of things that have made sense when they're on the ground. They're up in the air now and they're starting to fall. And that's why the world feels like it's coming apart. Because the world has been inverted. It hasn't been inverted technologically, and it hasn't been inverted in any other sensible way. It's been inverted morally. Moral inversion. That's what the left needs. They need moral inversion. For the left to succeed, they need the votes of criminals or the underclass. And therefore, for the left to succeed, they have to back policies that say that if a person comes into your bedroom at 4 o'clock in the morning with something in his hand and you shoot him, you go to jail, he sues you for thousands or millions of dollars. That's what the left needs in order to succeed, in order to get the votes they need from people who can't cope. So that is it. To me, that's inverted morality. If somebody comes into my window at 4 o'clock in the morning and I shoot them and I go to jail, and if they survive getting shot, they get to sue me for benefits, and I have to spend the rest of my life paying for them because they were in my bedroom trying to either shoot, murder, rape, or attack me in whatever form they want to. The world is upside down. In a sane world, somebody comes through my window at 4 o'clock in the morning and I shoot them and I kill them. In a sane world, people would say, well, if that guy didn't want to get shot, maybe he shouldn't have been inside the guy's bedroom at 4 o'clock in the morning, right? That's sensible, logical, moral, clear, decent. That's Texas. That's the West. That's a world without sophistry and lawyers. It's a world where if somebody stole your horse, you would hang that person. You'd have the sheriff hang that person, and horse thief was hanged because by taking a man's horse, you weren't just stealing his property. It's not like you ran out of there with his television. It's not like you stole his book. You didn't steal his entertainment. In the Old West, if you stole a guy's horse, you stole not only his livelihood, you may have taken his life. He may need that horse to plow his field, or else he starves to death. He may need that horse to get to supplies in town, or else he starves to death. He may need that horse to ride out and fight Indians, or else he starves to death. You basically, by stealing his horse, you've taken his life. Simple. But the world is upside down, and they need it to be upside down. But Brent, here's the thing. The world can't stay upside down forever. And the thing I've been getting a sense of since the end of this summer, it's not like I've been sitting on this for years and years and years. With this Muslim invasion of Europe and the climate change stuff and all the rest of it, I get such a sense now I get such a sense that not just the American population, but everybody in the West has had enough of being told to believe things that their own eyes tell them are not true. Period. Full stop. They have had enough of being told to believe in things that their own eyes tell them are not true. Their willingness to go along with these top-down things like the greatest threat to our civilization is global warming. They'll agree to that in public, and some of them will agree to it at the water cooler, and some of them will preach to their neighbors to show just how morally advanced they are. Stefan used a term called pathological altruism. They actually get a dopamine rush out of acting virtuous when they're not. And so most of the country is waking up. Some of them will never wake up. Some of them would rather die than wake up. But I get the sense that this is no longer, I think we're past peak political correctness, and I no longer feel like my mission is to educate people about things that they already know to be true. I think moving forward, my mission is to say, I know it's not true. You know it's not true. It's okay to say it's not true. It's okay to say it. It's okay to say that Barack Obama is not a very bright guy. He's certainly one of the laziest presidents we've ever had. How can you say that about a black president? Because it's true. Because it's true. That's why I can say it. Because it's true. He's lazy and he's not very bright. How can you say he's not very bright? Let's see his school grades. Let's see his records. You want to know whether I'm a bright guy or not? You can look at my school records and you can look at what I wrote. Let's see his records. Well, those are sealed. Why would they seal his records if he got nothing but A's and B's? If he is, in fact, the smartest guy who ever went to any of these schools, this brilliant, intellectually brilliant man, why would you seal his records? Why would you not release them? If he is, in fact, so much smarter than George W. Bush, wouldn't you be putting his records, his academic records, on the front page of every newspaper? I've said this before on this show, but I used to be genuinely puzzled at how, for the first time in history, when Barack Obama was made the president of the Harvard Law Review, he was the first president of the Harvard Law Review not to review any books. And I thought, man, I just don't know. How did they pull that off? How did they pull that off with regards to the rest of the faculty? How did they pull that off with regards to the fundraising? We have a president of the Law Review who's not writing any law reviews. I mean, how did they pull that off? And then I realized, like a thunderbolt, of course he wrote law reviews. Of course he did. He doesn't become president of the Harvard Law Review and not write any law reviews. But they selected him before they read them, you see. And when he started producing these law reviews, 106 IQ can get you a sense that, gee, you're really smart if you're surrounded by people who have an 80 IQ. But when you go to Harvard Law and you're surrounded by people who have IQs of 130 or 140, all of a sudden the 108 doesn't seem so impressive. As a matter of fact, it is appalling. And I think he wrote at least one or two or three law reviews, and they were reviewed by the Harvard Law Review and the faculty and the rest of the students, and they simply said, this is unprintable. This is unprintable. If we print this, it will be evidence of the fact that the only reason we selected this guy because he's good-looking and black. That's why his records haven't been released, and that's why the president of the Harvard Law Review didn't publish any law reviews, because they were unpublishable. There's nothing else that makes sense. There's no other explanation that makes sense. If his law reviews had been brilliant, we would have heard nothing but how brilliant they are, and we could all read them, and Scalia would look at them and go, I never really considered that before. That's a profound insight. If he'd written brilliant law reviews, they'd be shoved down our throat. If he'd gotten excellent grades, that would be shoved down our throat. But it's not. It's kept secret from us. We're not allowed to know about them. And you don't hire the president of Harvard Law to not write law reviews. Of course he wrote them. They were unreadable. They were unprintable. To print them would be to admit that he's an affirmative action law review president, in the same way that he's an affirmative action president. And this is why I hate affirmative action. I don't hate affirmative action because it makes black people president. I hate affirmative action because it allows people who would never, ever have the qualifications to be president to become president. And what that means is there are millions, literally millions, of black Americans who would make a far, 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 far better president than this joke. But because of this comedy club with Harvard and Yale and all the rest of it, those people didn't get a chance to be America's first black president. Millions of people working in this country would have been a better first black president than this man. Millions of them would have been a much better first black president, but they didn't get the chance to be the first black president of America because the charlatan with 106 IQ who spent his entire childhood sitting on the beach smoking doobies and laughing at things and thanking the Choom Gang stole their position, stole their history, stole it away. So there you go. Sarge 58 wants to go, is his IQ really that low? Is it verifiable? Look, I'm not administering IQ test to Barack Obama, but I do know this. I've heard him speak off a teleprompter. I don't find him to be bright. The people that know him admit that he doesn't read anything. What does he do with his spare time? I can tell you what I do with my spare time. I read a lot in my spare time. I'm addicted to being educated. I can't not learn things. I cannot sit still without reading something. I just can't. So I would love to have a one-on-one conversation with Barack Obama that lasted 24 hours, and I would like to get random questions from the audience of this nature. Describe to me, Mr. President, what you would see if you were to sit in this chair and then suddenly just continue to go straight up into the air. Just continue to go straight up into the air. Describe to me what you would see. He couldn't answer that question. I could. I'd see, well, first of all, as we got through the roof, we'd be able to look down on the top of the building. And as we got higher and higher and higher, we'd be able to see the outlines of the city. He could probably get that far. And then we'd begin to see the outlines of the country. And after a while, we'd be able to see all of the earth. And as we continued to pull higher, we would see much further away than we expect, much further away than we expect. We'd see the orbit of the moon. As we continue our upward journey into space, you'll never be able to see the orbits and you'll never be able to see the planets because they're so microscopically small compared to the star. But as you rose higher, you would be able to at least theoretically see the orbits of Venus, and then you'd see the orbit of Mars and Mercury. And here's the sun. As you go higher and higher, here comes Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And as we continue to pull out, we can begin to see the planetoids that are the dwarf bodies that orbit outside there. And we go further and further, and now we're in the Oort comet cloud, which consists of hundreds of millions of little dirty ice snowballs that are circling around our solar system. And as we continue out, there is now this enormous vacuum of space. There's really just nothing forever. And as we continue and continue and continue, finally 4.5 light years away, in a solar system where the Earth is 8 minutes light away from the sun, we start to see the first star, which is Alpha Centauri. It's a triple star system consisting of Alpha Centauri A, which is a yellow G-type star, Alpha Centauri B, which is a K-type star, a little warmer, a little smaller than Alpha Centauri A, and the closest star at the moment, Proxima, which is a red dwarf, which actually orbits the A and B team, and at this moment is slightly closer to us, so Proxima Centauri technically is the nearest star. And as we continue our journey up, we begin to see, we're accelerating all the time, by the way, because a linear journey up means it would take us 4 years to get to the nearest star. But as we continue to accelerate as we go upward, we can now begin to see the stars of our local neighborhood. Oh, look, there's Sirius not too far away, 26 light years, I want to say, something like that. And as we get larger and larger and larger, we can start to see the shape of the galaxy. We realize there's spiral arms, and we're located in one of these arms of the galaxy. We're about 2/3 of the way from the center of the galaxy, which is about 100,000 light years across. Let's keep going higher and higher. Hey, look, there's 2 dwarf galaxies down there. One's called the smaller Magellanic Cloud. The other one's called the Little Magellanic Cloud. They're little irregular dwarf galaxies that orbit our Milky Way. Let's just keep on going. Let's keep on going. Oh, look, there's another giant spiral just like ours, Barred Spiral Galaxy. It's Andromeda. I can tell that it's actually slightly larger than the Milky Way. It's the largest galaxy, and the Milky Way is the second. And here's M33 and Triangulum, that's third. And as we continue, and there's another huge void, and then all of our galaxies are in a little local group, which consists of, 25, 30, 40 galaxies. And then this group is part of a subgroup. Now there's hundreds of galaxies. And as we go as far as we can imagine, we see this spider web of mega clusters of galaxies that has a very, very interesting, exotic kind of look. And in the far distance, we can see the background radiation of the Big Bang. Your turn, Barack Obama. Your turn. Tell me what you would see. Tell me what you would see if we started moving down in the scale. Tell me what you would see. What would you see? You couldn't answer these questions. You couldn't answer any of these questions. Tell me about Moby Dick, Barack Obama. What is Moby Dick about? Well, it's about a guy who puts a harpoon in a whale. Yes, that's the plot of Moby Dick. But why is Moby Dick such a classic? Tell me about Moby Dick. What is Moby Dick about? What's it about? He couldn't tell you what it's about. If he knows anything about it, it's about a guy who sticks a spear in a whale and chases it around the world. He couldn't get into... Barack Obama's not capable. I'm not saying he's not smart enough. He's just not educated enough. He couldn't talk about the idea of obsession and why he was named after the biblical character of Ahab. And he couldn't talk about losing your reason and sanity out of a sense of rage and hatred. He couldn't talk about sacrificing everything that you love in life because of the ego, because of the raw ego of Ahab, the simple raw ego of it, the narcissism of Moby Dick. Moby Dick is a story of narcissism. It's a story of a man who cannot let go of an injury that occurred occurred to him a long, long time ago. He's going to ruin his life. He's going to ruin his ship. He's going to ruin the lives of everybody on board his ship. But he is going to achieve his ego goal, whether or not he takes the entire world to hell with him. And you hear language in Moby Dick like, I spit my last breath at thee, I circle the gates of hell at thee. Do you think Barack Obama has the intellectual depth to make that argument? I don't. Nothing he says has convinced me he has that kind of intellectual depth. Nothing he says. And when you listen to him speak off of a teleprompter, does he speak quickly? Does he speak with authority about different issues when he's off the teleprompter? What does he sound like? What did he sound like in Paris when he's off the teleprompter? Well, it's important that we maintain at all times a position that is not at odds with our common values. That's not who we are. Thanks for the insight, Nostradamus. You know, I don't know what his IQ is, but it's not. Do you think that he's got the IQ of Victor Davis Hanson? Do you think he's got the IQ of Rush Limbaugh? Do you think he's got the IQ of Ben Carson is 3 times smarter than Barack Obama. He's probably got triple his IQ. Do you actually think it's not even a question of IQ, although IQ is a lot of it? Barack Obama simply does not have the network of neurons to do the work that Ben Carson does. But the main reason that Barack Obama can't do what Ben Carson does on a daily basis is not because Barack Obama is not smart enough to do it, although he's not smart enough to do it. He's not motivated enough. He's too lazy. The idea of Barack Obama sitting down and reading books and taking tests and being graded and being rejected and staying at it and staying at it and staying at it for 20 years until he's developed enough skill in one area to be able to perform at the top 1% of any particular activity. Do you think he's got that kind of persistence to become a brain surgeon? Forget the intellect. Do you think Barack Obama has the work ethic to become a brain surgeon? No, he does not. He's a fraud. He's got a smile. He's got this. That's what he's got. That's what he's got. That. I got that too. Cost me about $15,000 over the space of a couple of years. Any other questions I can help you with? Idiot. He's not an idiot. An idiot is somebody with an IQ of 80. He's not an idiot. He's slightly smarter than average. Slightly smarter than average. I think he's about 106, 108, somewhere in that ballpark if I had to guess. Let's see. Trey Lyles says, if Sanders or Clinton becomes president, God forbid, where will you move to, and will you leave the location disclosed only to strata loungers? If Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders are elected president, I'm staying here in the United States of America, and I'm going to continue to fight for this country because I'm not going to give this country up. Not on my watch, not on my shoulders, not on my responsibility. I have to go face my maker and my ancestors as well. I have to go to the halls of my mighty fathers, in whose company I would like to not be ashamed. I'm not going to tell them, yeah, I gave up the United States of America, just ran away from this thing that people have fought and died for 250 years, the only real outpost of human freedom, ingenuity, creativity, all of that. The only place it's ever appeared on the history of the earth. It was handed to me intact and completely intact and handed to me entire. And because other people's narcissism or stupidity or whatever became so annoying to me that I finally just ran away from it. I just left it there. I left it out in the street to rot. I just ran away. I'm never going anywhere. I'm going to stay in this country until we get this country back, period. I'm not running away from these guys, these big talking douchebags like Alec Baldwin and the rest. If Bush is elected, I'm leaving the country. If Trump is elected, I'm leaving the country. No, you're not. You're too narcissistic to leave the country. Where can you get cocaine and Russian hookers in outer Mongolia? Where are you going to find all the things that make your life worthwhile there, George and Brad and it's just sad. It really is just sad. Matt, where are you going to go? You're not going anywhere. It's just moral posturing. It's just more endorphin rush from pathological altruism that sounds good but doesn't do any good. No, I'm not going anywhere. Staying right here. I may move into a different office, but I'm staying in the United States of America, and I'm not leaving. If this country's going down, I'll be the guy who closes the door and turns out the lights. I'll be the last guy out of the room. And so will you. We're not worried about these guys. I'm not worried about them. I don't fear them at all. I fear their power. I fear what they can do. I fear what they want to do. But that is an existential fear for the country. I don't have any personal fear about them. They can do what they want to. Shelby Foote said, and this I said, got to say this face to face to Dinesh D'Souza, when I got a chance to interview him just a week or two ago. I said, Shelby Foote, I think it was Shelby Foote, he was either quoting somebody or it was himself, but it was in the Civil War trilogy, I'm quite sure. He said, there are worse places for patriots to be than in a dungeon someplace. He was referring to the number of newsmen that Lincoln locked up for the duration of the war. Really, mostly that Stanton did, but certainly with Lincoln's approval. He felt he had a war to win, and he suppressed anti-war sentiment. And if your paper was printing defeatism, Lincoln had you, Stanton basically, but Lincoln had you arrested. And they'd smash your printing press and throw you in jail to the end of the war. And people rightly say that is a horrible abuse of power and something to be ashamed of, and how can you be a conservative and do that? My response would be, Lincoln felt it was necessary to win the war, and if he had not won the war, the Constitution and the country would have gone away, so he bent the Constitution in order to save it. That argument makes sense to me, and I think he had justification for it. But it's nuanced. It's not like, hey, I'm 100% behind that idea of throwing these guys in jail. And people of goodwill will disagree with me, and that's fine. And we can have an argument. Maybe you'll change my mind. But I'm not going anywhere. Hey, you can't have a show without a Tiemans. Zechariah Tiemans says a key aspect in the progressive worldview is the idea that if the cause is a noble one, anything and everything done to achieve it is justified. So the question is, when do the ends justify the means, and when do they not? And I've given this a little bit of thought, and the answer is, Zechariah, the more I think about it, I think more people have been killed as a result of the sentence, the end justifies the means, than any other single ideology in history. I think the end justifies the means is what has been used in every single genocide in human history and most of the wars. So I don't think it's ever justified. The end justifies the means is probably the most evil sentence that ever's been written. And even if you think you're going to do good with the ends justify the means, it's still evil. It's nothing but temptation. That's why the genius really, sometimes the lightest entertainment has the deepest genius in it. I did an afterburner about, when Maureen Dowd, when he was just elected, said that Barack Obama was Mr. Spock and why he shouldn't sit in the captain's chair. I love that Star Trek afterburner. But there's a point that I didn't make, and that is the point that's made in The Wrath of Khan. In Wrath of Khan, Spock, the brilliant one, the intellectually brilliant one, says that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. You ask any progressive if the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, and they'll say, of course they do. Of course the needs of the many outweigh the needs of these 10 people or this one person. Of course the needs of 10 million people have more weight than the needs of that one person. And once you make that decision, and once you're comfortable with that, and once you accept that as just obviously logically true, because Spock says it's logically true, and he's right. Once you understand that it's logically true, then the gulags and the death camps are just a matter of time. Kirk's position is, and when you think about it, the American position is, if one of our guys is down, if we have a soldier that's been left behind, or better example is if we have an airman that's shot down behind enemy lines, then we'll send 10 guys in to rescue him, or 100 guys in to rescue him, or 1,000 guys in to rescue him. And then you get into, well, what's the sense in that? Well, first of all, it doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be the right thing to do. It has to be morally correct. That is the morally correct position. If we are asking a pilot to fly over enemy territory, and by flying over enemy territory risk being captured, tortured, or tortured to death, imprisoned for life, then we've made a bargain with this young man or woman nowadays, and the bargain is that you are going to take that risk with the understanding that if your number should come up and you get shot down, then we will come and rescue you. And then people on the left will say, are you telling me that if one pilot gets shot down, you're willing to send 1,000 people in to rescue him, and all of those 1,000 people might be killed in the rescue attempt? And I say, I'm categorically stating that's what I would do, and I don't think there's any other position. The needs of the one outweigh the needs of the few or the many. That guy's in distress, and we are going to mobilize every resource we have until we get him back. And if you don't understand that, there's something wrong with you. You're broken. And that's what the Coast Guard is all about. You've got a ship in distress out at sea, and they're in real trouble, and they're likely going to die. But now you're going to send another crew full of 4 guys in a helicopter out into these horrible conditions and risk losing them too just to save a guy who's in a lifeboat? Yes. Yes, that's right. The needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many. That's the kind of world you want to live in. It's the kind of world all of us want to live in. Somebody is in a well, a little baby's in a well, or is trapped in a mine or something, and 5,000 men or 500 men or 50 men are going to dig their way down there and risk their lives to save an infant. They might all be killed. They're all fathers who have kids to support. Is this the right thing to do? Shouldn't we just let that child die? Doesn't that make sense? Of course it makes sense. It's the wrong and evil thing to do. It's not even something you can explain to people. You're either wired that way or not. You either are or you aren't. Do you want to live in a world where your life is calculated as a percentage of the total number of people risked, or would you rather live in a world where your life is perceived to be so valuable that thousands of people are going to risk theirs in exchange to save yours? I know which one I'd rather live in. There's no question about it for me. That's why The Wrath of Khan is such a profoundly deep story. It's ultimately about Kirk saying, yes, I will destroy the ship and I will kill everybody on it to have the chance to save my friend. Because he would have done the same for me. Whether he would have done it in Spock's case or not, he would have. Spock would have. He would have done it. He would have beaten himself up over it because it's not logical, but he would have done it. So this is the answer of this kind of moral question of when do the ends justify the means? Never. They never justify the means. Bill, if you had to kill one innocent person to save the country, an innocent American, and you had to shoot him in the head, and by shooting him in the head, you would abolish progressivism forever, and you would get rid of Hillary Clinton and Obama, and you'd get the best president who ever lived, a guy to make Romney, or a guy who'd make Ronald Reagan look like a piker. And all you have to do is kill this one guy. He's probably going to die anyway. Would you do it? I would not. I would not. We can overthrow these people without having to murder this guy, and I wouldn't do it. And this is where you get down to these some of these ethical questions where they ask. If you control a switch, you're in a switch, and there's a trolley coming down a path, and you control the switch, and if the trolley continues straight, it's going to hit a group of people. If you divert it over to one side, it's going to kill one person. If it goes straight, it's going to kill 10 people. What would you do? If I was in that situation, I would divert it to kill the one person, because the 10 people are going to die and the one person is going to die. One of these two things is going to happen. We don't send people to If you had asked me, and let me explain to you what the difference is, why this answer is different than the one I just gave. If I had told you that we have a pilot behind enemy lines, would I send 1,000 men in to rescue him? I absolutely would. But if we had a pilot behind enemy lines, would you say, well, would you kill 1,000 men to rescue him? Would you just shoot him in the head? Of course not. Of course not. Isn't this hard to figure out? No. Now you're talking about certain death for either 10 people or one person. That's not the same thing. Would I risk jumping in front of something? Yes. Would the 10 people? Yes, of course they would. You take a risk to save a life. You take a risk, but it's not a suicide mission. This is not obvious to many people. I read this, I think I might have put it in one of my eject essays, but it's superb. It's a short story. It's written by this woman. I've forgotten her name now. I am losing my memory so fast, I'm telling you. It might come back to me. But the story is called The Ones That Walk Away from Omelas. It's a profound story. Let me just add, I can set up the story very, very quickly for you. I know how my people will answer, and I know how progressives would answer. And this is the difference between conservatives and progressives, is how they would answer this question. The basic story of how they run of those that walk away from Omelas is this. There is a town, a city, a walled city called Omelas. And inside Omelas, Omelas is beautiful. It's like Minas Tirith. Everything sparkles, everything is clean. The banners snap in the wind, the silver trumpets blow. No one is sick. There is no disease in Omelas. There's no poverty in Omelas. There's no hunger in Omelas. There's no nothing in Omelas. Omelas is a paradise of genuine philosophy, genuine love. All the children are loved in Omelas, and all the parents love them. All the food is pure, and everything works. It is utopia and paradise on earth. However, what we find about Omelas is one thing, and that everybody in the city of Omelas knows that this is true. The reason that Omelas is free from any kind of disease, free from any kind of hunger, free from ignorance, free from hatred, free from murder, free from burglaries, it's free from all of that. The reason that this is the case is because in a dungeon in the center of the city, not in a nice gilded cage in a dungeon in the basement of a regular store or something. An innocent girl is chained to the wall, and she lives in her own filth, and they keep sliding her a bowl of slop, and that's the only food she gets, and she is 100% innocent. But her suffering drives the happiness and the prosperity of everyone else. And it's clear, because these are the magical conditions in the story, it's clear that if this person is set free, then not only will all the beautiful things about Amalus go away, then disease will come to Amalus, and war will come to Amalus, and child abuse will come to Amalus, and thousands of people will die, and children that had previously been loved will be neglected, and fathers will come home as alcoholics, and they'll beat their wives to death, and disease will prosper and spread, and thousands will die horrible deaths. So therefore, probably including this girl, maybe including her, so therefore, no one can reasonably say that this isn't the deal to take, that this innocent person throughout this magical relationship has to suffer so that everybody else can live a life of virtue, happiness, joy, and love. But some people, she writes in the story, some people, very few, 1 in 100,000 or something, the deal is they're required to go down and see this person. Some people mock the person. Some people want to kick the person, the little girl. Some people are filled with a great deal of sympathy and wish they could do something, but they know that that is the deal. She is innocent and she stays locked up in this filth for the rest of her life in the darkness, or all of that up there goes away. And some people, 1 in 1,000, just wake up one day, think about that girl down there, and they walk away from Amalus. And they never look back and they never go back. And I would be one of those people, and I think you would be too. Because no matter how much logic it makes about the end justifying the means, no matter the fact that if you broke that deal, you would then condemn happy, loving people to the same vicissitudes of life: disease, death, alcoholism, murder, rape, all of that. You're going to bring it into the world where it doesn't exist now in exchange for that person being set free. I wouldn't take the deal. And most of you wouldn't take it either. And the reason you wouldn't take the deal is because no matter what the material payoff is, and the material payoff is enormous, we know on some level that it is unjust. It is unjust. It is evil to make an innocent person pay for other people's happiness. It is unjust. You walk away from a place like that, and you go live in a world of disease where randomness may take thousands of children instead of this one child. It may take thousands of children or a million of them, but you are not living a life of ease and luxury at the expense of somebody innocent who is suffering for your luxury. You cannot bear it. You walk away. Walk away. I would walk away. I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't live with myself, and I'd be willing to bet you everybody who watches this show would feel the same way. What would progressives say about that? They would, and they wouldn't be lying for them to say, are you serious? Hundreds of thousands or millions of people are going to live healthy, and if you don't do this, they're going to die, they're going to catch diseases, they're going to die, thousands of people are going to die. Of course you sacrifice the child. Of course you do. Of course you keep her trying to, look, it's really sad, but if she were let go and this deal were to happen, she might be sold into slavery, she might be beaten to death anyway. Yes, but. I am not, Ursula K. Le Guin, thank you, Dan. I am not going to succeed on the back of someone innocent suffering. And this is why we love capitalism. They think that capitalists are rich due to the suffering of the poor. This is the moral equation they make all the time. That's why they think capitalists and rich people are evil. But we, being people who believe in the free market, understand, look, my prosperity is not at anybody else's expense. I'm not taking money out of a limited pot that could otherwise go to some kid's education or their dinner. I'm creating new wealth on my own, and that wealth is going to be dispersed out to them. It's going to make their lives richer as well. I make my own wealth out of the work I do. The work I do is not dependent on anybody. It's not dependent on anybody. So that's why I'm a free market capitalist and a conservative. And that's why I would not take the deal. I wouldn't take the deal because that city, that beautiful, poetic, scientific, clean, spotless, healthy paradise is based on a fulcrum of evil. It's based, all of its beauty, all of its achievements, all of its health, all of its love, all of its kindness, all of its success, all of its wonder is based upon a fulcrum of one person suffering who doesn't deserve to suffer. And that's evil. It's wrong. It's wrong. And I wouldn't stand for it. So yes, end justifies the means is the worst thing that has ever been spoken in the English language, in my opinion. All right, let's see here. I can skip a couple of these because it is getting a little late here. An hour and 14 minutes, my God. 34 minutes, yeah, about an hour and a half. We'll do a couple more. Matt Jarvis says, I was reading a couple of articles in rebuttal to some ranting by a SJW, that'd be a social justice warrior, proclaiming people of color, which sounds so much like colored people to me, should only read books or take seriously the opinion of insert either race, gender, LGBT, whatever here, instead of white men that happen to write books and such. Isn't social justice warrior just another term for pissed off Nazi that wants to tell everybody what they are doing wrong? They're not just fascists, these little kids who want to ban the works of white writers because they're black and they should therefore only read black literature. You can certainly make the case, and I think it's a fair case to say, that for many years the contributions of people, of black writers or Asian writers or whatever, have been somewhat undervalued, and that opening up literature to voices that may not have been recognized earlier is, of course, a good thing for everybody, not just for black students, but for white students. If there are black authors of merit who have interesting things to say about the human condition, who have not been taught or discovered, then I benefit by them being taught or discovered. With that simple caveat out of the way, it is a form of control. It's a form of childishness. It's a form of perpetual victimhood. It's basically saying, I'm only going to read black authors because only black authors can understand my condition. Really, Snowflake? Your condition today in Yale, only a black author like Frederick Douglass can understand your position of hardship in a university that you attend for $100,000 a year, and your $600 toys, and your life of leisure in Uber, and please. But it's even deeper than that. If you're saying that you're only going to read black authors, let's just say, life is not just literature, If you're only going to read black authors, you're not going to know anything about Isaac Newton. You're not going to know anything about gravity. You're not going to know anything about relativity. You're not going to know anything about germ theory. You're not going to know anything about pasteurization. You're not going to learn anything about inoculation. You're not going to learn anything about penicillin. You're not going to learn anything about most archaeology. You're not going to learn much about anything. And your world will get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Listen, reality is reality. White men have achieved most of the achievements in this society, in any society. You don't have to like it. It's just true. It doesn't mean only white men have done it, and it doesn't mean only men have done it, but the vast majority of the things that we are based our lives on today have been accomplished by white men. Does that mean that it shouldn't change in the future? Well, what it means is, in the future, if white men had excluded women, if white men had excluded black men or black women, that exclusion has to stop. And it's in everybody's interest that it stops. If there are black geniuses, women geniuses, Chinese geniuses out there who've been deprived a chance to have a voice or research funds or whatever, then it's my interest as a white man to have these people succeed. And it's my interest as a white man for them to have literature that's worthy, interesting, and timeless, and it would be to my advantage to read these things. But if you're basically going to say that you need to read a book who's written by a black author in place of Shakespeare because he's black and he's written something of relatively low value, then the only person you're cheating is yourself. So go ahead and cheat yourself. If you only want to read about black scientists, then just read about black scientists. And if you only want to read about black science as discovered by black science, knock yourself out. But your life is going to be limited, and you are not going to have any opportunity to succeed in anything like that. And that's why you don't hear it from people who go on to be engineers, and you don't hear this kind of whiny, victim-y nonsense from anybody who's half serious. You don't hear nurses talking about things like this. You don't hear engineering students who may be Asian or black or whatever, or gay. You don't hear sensible, serious people saying things like this. The only people who say things like this are people who have literature degrees or who have studies in victimology. I am a women's study major. That's the kind of person who would make a statement like that. My degree is in black history. Swell. You might make a kind of statement like that. But somebody who has to survive in the world with a useful degree can't just not afford to block out white male authors. You can't afford to block out any authors. If you plan to succeed out there and somebody's got something interesting to say about it, you ought to read what they have to say. And we get to the deeper issue now, which is this kind of, it's a black thing you can't understand. I am willing to say that there are things about being black in America that I cannot relate to immediately, that don't affect me, that I haven't had on my radar. Experiences that I may have colored my perspective. I'm certainly willing to admit that. But the idea that I cannot understand it is a lie. If a skillful enough black author were to write a book explaining what it means to be black in America, then I could understand it. I could sympathize with it. I could sympathize with it to the degree that I can sympathize with any other piece of literature, like Mark Twain or Hamlet or anything else. Hamlet is not about a white guy in Denmark, for God's sakes, you miserable lowlife idiots. Hamlet is not about what a white Danish prince does with a decision. Hamlet is what you do with a decision. Hamlet is what every single human being has to grapple with as it comes time to deal with a decision of monumental importance. And that's why we know who William Shakespeare is. It's not because he's given advice to young white Danes who lived 400, 500, 600 years ago. It's because his writings are so profound that the story of a white Dane who lived 500 years ago is relevant to this very second and day, because he's captured the essence of the human condition, which doesn't change. Now, if you have large numbers of black authors can do that, then they should be read by everybody, not just by black students, by white students, because if that kind of author can capture that kind of experience, they need to be read for my personal benefit and yours as well. But unfortunately, that's not the case. It may have been a historical aberration, in which case, by all means, let's open the doors to people of that level of talent, but it doesn't mean that we have to throw away works that are timeless and immortal for perfectly good reason in order to read junk, just because it happens to be written by a guy who's Asian or black or gay. I'm not saying that everything that Asians, black, or gays write is junk. I'm saying exactly nothing like that. I am saying that if you're going to throw away a classic in exchange for junk, that's not a good trade. There's many, 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 many more white authors who've written Drek than there are black authors who have written Drek. Many, 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 many more. So, to say that I'm going to give up on Shakespeare because he's an old white male is to deprive yourself of the single greatest insight into the human condition that has so far lived upon the earth. That doesn't mean that the next person who can do it won't be black or mixed or Hispanic or gay or a woman or all of them together. It just means so far the deepest insight into the human psyche has not just come from one work, by the way. If all he wrote was Hamlet, he'd be immortal. But the human condition in every one of his plays, and the reason so many Shakespearean phrases have worked their way into common language 600 years after they were written, 600 years after they're written, is because of their essential ability to apply to anyone. A black student sitting in Africa in a thatched hut today should be able to read Hamlet and be able to get the same emotional response as a guy who was a Danish prince in a castle at the time it was written, although obviously it happened before, at the time that Shakespeare wrote it. It should be as relevant to a black 14-year-old child in a hut in Africa as it is to a guy who's a Danish prince in the year 1875. They should get the same pretty much experience out of it, and that's why Shakespeare is Shakespeare. Not because he was writing from the perspective of a white Danish prince, but because he was writing from the perspective of the eternal elements of humanity that do not change and apply to everybody. Now, if you want to deprive yourself of that, I can't really stop you in the same way that I can't stop you from eating or drinking either, but if you want to starve yourself to prove a point, that's called a hunger strike. And if you want to just deprive deprive yourself of nutrition until you starve, that's fine. And there's that. So that's basically the argument I want to make. But since I'm in a mood, let's make another argument. If you want to tell me that a wooden mask from an African culture or a South American culture or a New Guinea culture, or a wooden mask made by Mongolians, or a wooden mask made by American Indians, or a wooden mask made by Bronze Age white people, if you want to tell me that a wooden mask that's hacked out of a piece of wood is the exact same level of art as the statue of David, you're wrong. They're not equal. They're both art, but they're not equal. If you want to tell me that a totem pole hacked together by an American Indian, or the finest product of art of the whitest people who lived in Europe 2,000 years ago, is equal to Michelangelo's statue of David, you're wrong. And the reason you're wrong is because which one do you think you could make? Which one do you think most people could make? Which one do you think is harder to make? In other words, if you are talking about hacking a piece of wood and putting in eyes and smearing some red paint on it and doing all these other things on a tribal level, if you think that that is harder or equally hard as seeing inside a block of the hardest substance known at the time, the form of a person who is so perfect that you can see the veins in his marble skin, if you think that these things are equal, then you're just an idiot. You're really, 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 really broken if you think these things are equal. They're not equal. I didn't sculpt the statue of David, and I'm not Greek. Was Michelangelo a white guy? Yes, so what? He was. But I don't get credit for him. He's Greek. He lived hundreds of years ago. He's Italian. I'm sorry, I kept saying Greek. I didn't mean to say Greek. He's Italian. Of course he's Italian. I didn't mean to say Greek. Sorry about that. He's Italian. And I don't own him. He doesn't belong to me. He belongs to all of us. Somebody makes it. You know what? I'll tell you where I was going to go with this, and I am going to go with this kind of degree of programming, because people hear this and they say, oh, yeah, I know where you're coming from. Let me say this. If you listen to rap today, or if you want to listen to the best music that I could compose, if you were to give me Mr. White American Male with all of my privilege, and if I had unlimited amounts of funds and I had millions of dollars and I went into a recording studio and I just sat there for years and years and years and had to make my own music would come a long, 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 long way short of the music of Scott Joplin, let's say. If you listen to Solace by Scott Joplin, if you listen to the emotion and the subtlety that he captures with just a piano, that's inachievable by me, and it's unachievable by virtually every white male in existence alive today. If you listen to Thelonious Monk, if you listen to Charlie Parker, but I love Joplin for some reason. I don't know what it is about Joplin, but ragtime became the name of an age because of a kind of music that I don't want to say he wanted invented, but he so dominated ragtime that they named an entire decade after him. If you listen to Scott Joplin's music and you listen to this is the thing. This is what I was saying a few moments ago about Shakespeare. I can listen to Scott Joplin today 100 years after he died, and he's a black man from 100 years ago, and he's speaking to me. He's not just speaking to black people. He's speaking to me, and I hear him, and I get it, and I'm enriched by it. And to say that, well, I'm not going to listen to Scott Joplin because he's black and I'm white, and I only listen to white authors, or I only listen to white musicians, is as ridiculous as what these people are saying. Really? Honestly? You really think that's the case? You really think the world would be better off without Scott Joplin, or better off without Thelonious Monk, or better off without Charlie Parker, or better off without Michael Jackson, or better off without any of these black artists? You really think that my life would be improved by not listening to them and only listening to white musicians? How ridiculous does that make me sound? How absolutely upside down and ridiculous does that make me sound? It makes me sound like an idiot, because I would be. And that's what these people are. They just want to wear the crown of thorns of victimhood. And they want to show everybody how outraged they are because they're not allowed to compete. They're not allowed to compete in sports. They're not allowed to compete economically. They're not allowed to compete in any other way except who can be the biggest victim and who can wear the bloodiest crown of thorns. And that's what this whole thing is all about. You couldn't understand it. It's a black thing. You couldn't understand it. Really? I understand Hamlet. I understand Joplin. I understand Joplin as well as you understand Joplin. As a matter of fact, I understand Joplin much better than you understand Joplin, you 20-year-old black student. I understand him much better than you do because I've been through enough in life to know what he's writing about. I know in that song, Solace, I know what he's trying to say. I know what he's trying to say to me. I am far, far, far more able to process what this black man 100 years ago wrote for me than you are. Because it's got nothing to do with being black. It's got to do with being human. And that's where you're deficient, young lady. And you're determined to keep yourself as deficient as you possibly can be. Yeah, let's go. I think we can do probably two or three more. Kevin Walsh, what should be the future role of NASA, if any? Should it continue to man space program, Mars, return to the moon, then Mars? Congress and Obama just established space property rights law. Any thought on that? As Glenn Reynolds says, that is the only thing good that will come out of this administration when history is being written, is the fact that you can develop privately outer space. And the only reason Barack Obama let that happen because it's one of the things that Barack Obama I caught myself doing it. Space exploration is one thing that Barack Obama simply could not care less about. In 2006, we were spending $14 billion a year on NASA, and we were flying 4 space shuttles multiple times a year. In 2015, we're spending $14 billion on NASA, and we're not flying anybody anywhere. So somebody explain to me why, if they claim that it took $14 billion to launch a number of space shuttles and keep 4 of them in constant operation, that would take $14 billion. I think that number is ridiculously high, but at least I'm getting spaceflight out of it. To say that the same organization needs the same amount of money to do nothing in space? To what? To sit behind a console and talk to the International Space Station? Does it cost the same amount of money as it does to launch any number of shuttle flights and keep 4 orbiters in flying condition? No. NASA has become, like everything else in the federal government, it's an immortal job program. It's an immortal job program. It used to be for engineers and test pilots. Now it's for bureaucrats and managers and administrators. So I do have an answer to this, though. NASA's budget should be slashed enormously. There are 2 things that I think NASA should do. One of them is that NASA should continue to work with places like JPL, help coordinate with JPL, and now Johns Hopkins University has done some great work on some of these probes. I think it was Johns Hopkins that did the New Horizons probe. It took Voyager 6-7 years to get to Jupiter, and New Horizons got there in 4 months because New Horizons was hauling ass. It took 15 years to get to Pluto, and they did it. They shot terrific pictures. That wasn't NASA. That was Johns Hopkins, coordinated by NASA. So I think the place for NASA is to fund and help to fund missions of exploration through robots, preparatory to going there by humans, and the humans need to go there through private companies because I'll get to that in a second. I think the other thing that NASA should be doing right now is that NASA should basically be what NACA was. The NASA evolved out of the NACA, the National Advisory Council on Aeronautics. And what NACA did was virtually every airfoil, every wing design that flies today or has ever flown really, was basically developed by NACA. There's on the canard on my airplane, it's a NACA airfoil. I don't know what the number is, but it's like NACA 2119 or whatever the number is. So during the years prior to the 60s, NACA, before it became NASA, did fundamental research into aeronautics. So they changed it to include end space. So this primary research is appropriate for the government, and I'd be willing to spend tax dollars on it. I don't want to spend $14 billion if you're not going anywhere, guys. But NASA today should be working on things like this Vasimir drive, variable thrust, plasma drives. They should be doing research into nuclear rockets. They did an incredible job with Project Nerva. They built 22 nuclear rockets. Every one of them functioned except for the one that they didn't fire up. That's what NASA should be doing. And then that technology that's being driven, the raw technology being driven by NASA, that data should be made available to everybody because it's public information paid for by the taxpayers. And then private companies should use that data to come up with commercial developments of that fundamental foundational research. And then commercial companies will use their expertise and their skill and their competitiveness to achieve the kind of spaceflight that we should have achieved 40 years ago. And as somebody has said and very truly said, it's one of the best examples I heard from. It might have been. You know, I don't remember who it was. I am a little concerned about my memory tonight. I seem to have a problem remembering all kinds of names tonight. But somebody said that if we'd had an FAA during the dawn of aviation, then right now in 2015, if I wanted to fly from Los Angeles to New York, if there'd been an FAA from the beginning, then I would buy a ticket on a propeller-driven wood-winged airplane that would seat 30 of us, would take 30 hours to get from Los Angeles to New York, and it would cost $8,000 per seat. That's what would have happened if the FAA had been there from the beginning. The reason that civil aviation advanced as fast as it did it in 20 years. The jet age happened in 10 years. Most people don't know this, but the first reliable commercial jet, the first jet that really changed aviation, started the jet age. The first commercial jet was a de Havilland Comet, British design. But the Comet had square windows, and they didn't think that was a problem, but they found out when you keep pressurizing and depressurizing the fuselage, you're basically inflating it like a balloon at high pressure so it can go high, and then you lower the pressure when it comes down, and the pressure comes in from the outside. So it's like inflating a rigid aluminum balloon that doesn't actually move. And what they found through having lost 2 airplanes was square windows provide a stress riser that right there on the square is where the cracks and the fractures started to happen from this constant flexing of it getting pressurized and depressurized. And 2 comets, might have been 3, but certainly 2, broke up in midair simply because they had rectangular windows. That's why every airplane window you ever see is oval-shaped, because the oval doesn't have a right-angle stress riser to start the cracks going. So my point, though, was the first real jetliner, the first modern jetliner was the Boeing 707. Most people today could probably not tell the difference between a Boeing 707 from a 737, except it's considerably smaller and narrower. But most people do not know that the Boeing 707, which I want to say first flew in 1958, somewhere in that ballpark, pretty close to that. The Boeing 707 that flew in 1958 is no faster than the latest 737, the A380, the 747, the 777, the Dreamliner, the 787. Every single one of these airplanes going back since 50 years ago, 60 years ago. For 60 years, every single commercial airplane has flown at the same top speed, and that top speed is approximately 550 miles an hour. You could probably get up to 6 or so. Shut up, Foghorn, you miserable lowlife bastard. I hate this guy. No wonder I'm talking about no one's been able to fly faster than 550 miles an hour in the last 50 years. And then this guy who's my friend who flies F-16s for a living writes simply, I can. Well, good for you. Why don't you go start your own airline then? Why don't you just start an airline of people in the backseat of F-16s and I'll promote it for you, you miserable lowlife son of a bitch. I hate these military pilots. They're so arrogant. Yeah, he can. He can fly it probably, I don't know, he's probably flown it. Viper's probably flown it, certainly he's flown it 1,200 knots, and he's probably pushed 1,600 knots. That's probably the end. No, he's broken 1,000 knots. He's probably been in the thousands, 700, 800, 900 knots, 1,000, 1,200 maybe in an emergency. He'll tell me in a minute, the lowlife. But look, the civilian airliners today travel at the speed they traveled 60 years ago. They haven't gotten any faster. They generally travel at the 0.9 Mach, 0.89, 0.8, high 0.8s, low 0.9s. In other words, they travel in the high 80s to the low 90% of the speed of sound. Concorde exceeded the speed of sound. Obviously, that could travel almost at twice the speed of sound. That airplane was doing probably 1,400 knots, going twice as fast, maybe 3 times fast, as a commercial jetliner today. Why is this important? Oh, because of NASA. So, nevertheless, all these airfoils were devised and basically put in the vault by NACA. It was a government agency, had nothing to do but build these airfoils, put them in a wind tunnel, measure the drag, measure the lift, measure the various amounts of lift at a certain angle of attack and the drag, write all this stuff down. Now we'll design a new airfoil, see if it does better, see if it does worse. And sure enough, that's been effective. And NASA should be doing that with propulsion. They should restart the NERVA program. They should be looking at ion propulsion. They should be looking at some of these differential gravity propulsions. That's a good thing to spend tax money on. but a limited amount. And very parenthetically, if you ask me how I think we should run the taxes in this country, I think that we should only be compelled to pay a tax to cover federal tax, to cover what is outlined in the enumerated powers of the Constitution and at the most frugal rate we can get them. In other words, every American should pay a same percentage of their income to cover the things that are outlined by the Congress, outlined by the Constitution in the enumerated powers, and that's it and that's all. However, I do think that our tax system ought to include a pull-down menu where you basically say, hey, I'd like to pay another $1,000 and I'd like all of it to go to NASA. Or I want to pay another $60 in taxes and I want it all to go to NPR. Or I want to pay $400 more in taxes and have it go to Planned Parenthood or whatever. I think we should have to pay for the stuff that the Constitution requires us to pay for, that we all share in common. And if you want to kick more in, then knock yourself out. And if you want to earmark it, I think that's great too. That's what I think we ought to do. Let's see here. I think this will do it. I'm getting a little beat, to be honest with you. This one comes from Scott Tomasaki. I haven't heard that name before. Hey, Scott. And Scott writes, hey, Bill, I'm thinking of going out west for spring break this year. Is there any way for myself or any of your fans to come see you for Speakeasy or any other such Bill Whittle event? I want to be a little better about trying to post my speaking engagements around the country, but to be perfectly honest with you, if you are in Los Angeles and you've got some time, just contact us on the website. And look, if I'm in the office, I'd love to have you come in. If you're okay with coming in for 10 or 15 minutes and seeing the spectacular office, I love meeting people who are fans. I love meeting people and hearing from them. I not only love it, I think it's part of my job. So if you're going to be in the Los Angeles area, I think probably info@billwhittle.com would do it. I know you won't abuse the privilege. But if it turns out you're going to be in the area and you're going to be here for 3 days or 2 days or an afternoon, we'll check my schedule. And if I'm in, and I'm usually in at least part of the time every day, we'd love to have you come by and say hi. I mean that sincerely. That applies to everybody. Unlike this president and Hillary Clinton and all the rest of them, I don't think that you work for me. I have a pretty clear understanding that I work for you, that, whether you're a member or not, even if you're even if you're an audience member, you're making my life possible. I work for you. You're the boss. You make my livelihood possible. So certainly, if you would like to come by and see your office, especially if you're a member, that goes double for members, and you would like to see your office and meet your employee, it'd be my pleasure to have it done. That doesn't necessarily mean I can arrange to be there if I wouldn't be there otherwise, but if it works out, then by all means do it. It'd be great to have a chance to say hi to everybody. Especially regulars in the Stratosphere Lounge. Strato Loungers are good people. Never met a bad one, with the exception, of course, of Foghorn, who is one of the most low-life scalawags and degenerates I've ever met in my entire life. Anybody who would brag about something like that to a man coming from my background is unspeakably cruel and suffers from serious, and I mean diagnosable, personality disorders, and I ought to know because I've met the guy, and it ain't pretty, folks. None of them. They're all barking mad, every one of them down there. Okay, I think that'll wrap it up for episode, what I want to say is 108. Yes, 108 episodes of the Stratosphere Lounge. Really good one tonight. A lot of fun, I thought. A lot of interesting stuff in there. Pullable quotes. Talked about the website design at the beginning, and we're going to do some web redesign, and we got a new banner that we like a lot. And we want to do some T-shirts. And one thought that we had for T-shirts would be to take maybe some of my quotes. I don't know if I've ever said anything quotable. Most of it's just random cursing and a rough assimilation of man shouting at clouds kind of thing. But I think what we might do is put together a little contest and see if we can pick the top 20 quotes, and then we'll take the top 20 and we'll put them in a online poll on our Facebook page, and then the top 5. And if you get one of the top 20, you get a T-shirt, and if you get one of the top 5, you get a membership or something like that. So if it turns out that we can do that, that'd be a fun thing to do. But for now, we're going to sign out of episode 108. As always, I expect to be here next Wednesday, but it's not that Stratosphere Lounge is my lowest priority. It's not that at all. It's just that it is the most loosely scheduled of the things that I do. I have so many things that are locked into the schedule, and then there are other things that just come up on a Wednesday that, like my sister being in town. It just happens. But I sure would like to be here next week. I fully expect to be here next Wednesday, and one way or another, we'll keep these things going. I think you're going to really be impressed by the new look of the place, though, so that's good. That'll do it for episode 108 of the Stratosphere Lounge. Again, thank you for your support. Thank you for your membership, those of you that are members. And be careful out there, and don't forget what I said about not giving up. I try to say that at the end of everything. We've fought and beat bigger things than this. They want you to believe that the guy's clothed in beautiful blue fabric with gold threads, but we know he's naked, and just because other people don't doesn't mean we're wrong, and it doesn't mean we have to give up either. So try your best to hang in there. The good news is, ladies and gentlemen, is that the wheels are coming off of Western civilization. And that's actually good news, because I'd rather have people say, holy cow, the wheels are coming off, we better do something, than walking in this kind of state of sleepwalking that we've been doing for a very long time now. So the fact that people are waking up to realize just how bad things have gotten is actually good news. And on some level, the worse things get, the more likely people are to do something about it. So keep that in mind the next time there's some kind of horrific act of treason or felonious conduct, which will undoubtedly be tomorrow morning on the Drudge Report. You can, pretty much take that as a pretty safe bet. Anyway, that's about the whole thing. So until next time, I will see you next time.